Hello and welcome to CrossPoints, CrossPoint Community Church's podcast ministry. Our goal during this podcast is to dig deeper into the weekly message topic through the additional study of the message passages, interviews, and additional resources. This week, our message topic is A New Me in 23, Our Mental Health. We discuss the idea that in the Bible, when God repeats himself, it is because it is important. The more he repeats it, the more important it is. I do not know about your home, but when my mom or dad repeated something, it was because we needed to hear it and probably obey it. So you better listen and obey. The same is true with God. But he also repeats himself so that his truth will overwhelm and oversaturate the lies that we believe. So again, this week we looked at Elijah's story in 1 Kings 17 through 19. Well, today we have the privilege of having Rebekah McNulty with us. She's a lead counselor at Sound Advice Counseling, whom we have a partnership with here at CrossPoint Community Church. And her job or her responsibility as a part of that partnership is to serve the community here at CrossPoint, but also the larger community as well. We love having this partnership with Rebekah and her being a part of our team here. So, welcome, Rebekah.
Thank you.
As we get started, I know you're a little nervous, and I'm a little nervous. This is my first interview on a podcast, and so we'll get that out of the way.
Mine too.
Yeah.
Okay.
So welcome here and
Thank you.
to CrossPoints. And so to get us started, why don't you share a little bit about your journey, like your faith journey, your life journey, and how you got interested in the mental health field?
Sure. Started out raised in a Christian church and Christian family. I went to a private Christian school, so I heard the word from a very young age. You know, as any of us do, we hear it. We don't always apply it as well as we should. But I think when I really started thinking about mental health in high school, that wasn't really the avenue I was going to go. You know, I wanted to be like a VP of some big corporation, or
You mean you wanted to make lots of money?
I wanted to make money. Let's be honest.
Who doesn't?
So,
right?
but I ended up in mental health because I was coaching gymnastics and I was working with kids and I loved it, but it really wasn't a career. It was fun. I was able to stay in shape, all the stuff. But I was thinking, well, what can I do? I love sitting and talking with kids. So I would have kids come in the gym really early, practice early, come sit and talk with me, end up bringing kids to church. So that's kind of where the calling started, was how do I work with kids and have a career? And so that's when I had a friend that was in counseling, and I helped her with a couple different cases, volunteering, and I thought, I think maybe this is the avenue to go. So I chose that avenue. Did I start out working with kids out of grad school? Nope, God had another plan. Started in forensics, definitely not.
That's quite a bit different plan.
Not the same. So then end up working in different adult psych and geriatrics, and even with Alzheimer's and dementia, and then end up transitioning to military, working for Madigan Army Hospital in Washington State, and then end up starting my practice. So that's kind of the journey with how I transitioned from like a kid into where I am now as far as work goes.
Yeah. And coaching and counseling are really pretty similar. A good coach anyway is like a good counselor. The investment of time, the discussions, the life on life.
Right. And even the not always telling them what they want to hear, but still encouraging so that they don't get discouraged.
Yeah.
So it's kind of that building up piece. And so I think there are some crossovers there.
Yeah. So how do you see your life preparing you for this calling of counseling?
I think this has always been a little bit of what I do. Everyone's always came to me Even when I was younger, friends would come and talk to me if they were having issues, and I just always enjoyed it, and I never felt burdened by it, because I'll get that question from people. How do you do this all day, every day? And I say, I don't know. It doesn't feel like a burden. And so I think that's where it had to be a calling for it to not feel that way. So
yeah, it's definitely, it's life-giving to you.
Yes.
Or for some others, it may be life
Yes.
taking away.
Right.
In
Yeah.
some ways. Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
absolutely.
For sure. Well, awesome. So as we think about mental health, what is it? Like, it feels like this big word out there because everybody's talking about it today, but what does it really mean, and what is it?
Right. So when people think of mental health, they often think just mental disorder, right? Or mental illness.
Right.
So I was like, well, let me look at what the actual, like, what does the Merriam-Webster dictionary say mental health happens to be? And the definition they have, it's a condition of being sound mentally and emotionally that is characterized by the absence of mental illness and by adequate adjustment, especially as reflected in feeling comfortable about oneself, positive feelings about others, and the ability to meet the demands of daily life. So we often think of the negative connotation with mental health, but actually mental health is just like physical health. You can have poor physical health or good physical health. You can have poor mental health or good mental health. So the mental health a lot of people are thinking of is mental illness. And so mental illness can go from, the National Institute of Mental Health categorizes it as any mental health or serious mental health. So any mental health can range from almost benign to just very mild up through the severe. And then your severe mental illness is just those categories. And that's more of your bipolar, schizophrenia, the paranoia, where it really, really interferes with a person's functioning. And often that's where you'll see more of like a disability. People might live on disability is when it's reached that level.
Yeah. So all of us, I mean, for whatever, I mean, however you want to say it, like when we think about mental health, it's a whole picture. Yeah. And so just like if you go to the doctor and the doctor says, hey, you need to lose some weight, or hey, your blood sugars are too high, or whatever some of those things are. I mean, when you go to a doctor to talk about mental health, they may have similar type discussions with you about what's going on in your brain, some of the things that are, and it's part of it is talking to the doctor and having some honest conversations.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So in light of all that, then how do we know what is normal, healthy mental health?
Right.
Is there a way to...
There is. So when you look at what is normal, what is healthy, that can actually be very arbitrary because it depends on the person. So really not being healthy is when you're unable to enjoy life, unable to do the things you used to be able to do. Things aren't working for you anymore. So healthy is when you're able to have that full expression of your feelings, your emotions, and you're able to kind of adapt. I think of like that the word resiliency. Okay. So things may happen, but it isn't interfering with you still enjoying life. It isn't interfering with these negative kind of persistent thoughts. You can still do your everyday tasks. And that's part of that criteria when it comes to...
It's a moving target in some ways.
Right, yeah, because people will say, well, I'm coming in with all these issues, and then I might say, well, you don't meet criteria for a diagnosis, but it's very troubling to them. So it's...
Sure.
It may be significant to them, but it might not reach that quote-unquote clinically significant piece. And so there's truly things going on, but it isn't a disorder.
Sure.
They're
it's
just
life.
struggling with mental health. Right.
Yeah, they're in a season of life that's
Right.
extremely difficult, whether it's a
Right.
loss of a loved one or
Yeah.
a job or something that's caused maybe some trauma or something that's making them, or they're struggling with something.
Absolutely. And there's kind of a little bit of our culture that's taken this to another level, and people think there's something wrong if they have moments where they're feeling sad or
Sure.
they're feeling anxious. And some of those are normal, and sometimes it does take going in to see someone to say, is this normal? Is it not? And there may be pieces of, well, we can work on ways to improve that.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that you're all messed up, right? Because it's kind of like, oh my gosh, I'm so messed up. Maybe
Right.
not. Maybe you're just struggling right now.
Yeah, and in a season where you just need an outsider to help you process or think
Absolutely.
some things.
Yep.
Because when you're in a hole and you're digging, it's hard to see outside of that, for
Right.
sure. So,
Yeah.
so what are some of the great, some of the areas of mental health, or maybe a better way to say it is, how has mental health changed historically to today?
Okay. So it's changed a lot, and it keeps continuing to
Yeah.
change. So historically, it was mental illness that was looked at. They didn't really talk about mental health. It was more of mental illness. So there was lots of stigma. Treatments years ago were, lobotomies for schizophrenics, or ECT, electroconvulsive therapy. Even further back, there was like the bloodletting.
Yeah, yeah.
So, or witchcraft, that was another big one. Or trying other medicinal, like even way back with the bloodletting, they still did a lot of herbs and things.
Sure.
So that's been years that they've tried to work on some type of medicinal pieces for it.
Yeah. Try to find something to medicate,
Right.
to alleviate some pains, or whatever terminology you want to use
Right.
for that. So.
Right. And there's been even changes in just philosophy of how we look at mental health. So, there's been just strictly biology, like you have no control of this. This is your destiny. And that actually was born out of the Darwinism. And that school of thought, there was also a school of thought of more of it's all organizational. And that was more of a mental hygiene standpoint. And then there's just been these evolution of theories that have happened over time. So you get some, it's all your thinking. Others, it's all about your past. So there can be a balance, and that's kind of depends on where people's bent is, as far as this is where I like to practice.
Sure.
So, and then my practice, I know for myself, has changed to where I brought God in sometimes, but I think that turning point for me was when I was working at Madigan, and I had soldiers come in that were either suicidal or homicidal, and I was the decision maker. Do I let this person walk out the door?
Right.
Do I put certain restrictions, or do I try to get them hospitalized?
Wow.
So that was a piece where, because some came in that were homicidal. And
Sure.
so it was, okay, I got to work within this. I can do my best assessment, but people present how they want to present. So
Sure.
there can always be that piece. And so I know that I had to really rely on God at that point and go, it's not me. You've got to help me make the right decision here. Because
Some discernment, some spiritual discernment.
absolutely.
And because the weight, that's a huge burden of weight to be on one person.
There was some praying over some weekends when I'd get someone on Friday. I gotta.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this then, in light of that, as Christians, what's the best way for us to view our mental health in light of our faith?
Right. So when I look, even as I think about how my practice shifted, I look at all the different components and pieces and go, okay, so these have changed over time. We have this thought, and then we have a study that supports it, and then we have a study that contradicts it. And then there's a new emerging thing, and then that's a transition. And then we hear, oh, well, actually, this is more effective. So now it's all about effective. Well, then who pays for studies, whatnot? We can get into that. Yeah. So you also then look at, okay, so this standard keeps changing. So the ultimate authority is God. God actually has a lot to say about it.
He does, yeah.
So that's where I'll take and go, okay, I can look at these pieces of what, the trainings I have to do all the time.
Sure.
I can look at this and what can I extract from it? What is consistent with God's word, which kind of ties into your message about like that. How do you know a counterfeit, right? So if you don't know the truth, you can't know something that is counterfeit. So if this isn't the real deal, so if it's not consistent with things that God says, it's not going to be as effective.
Yeah.
It's not going to hold that test of time.
So you're saying, what I hear you saying is like when you go to counsel and you receive new information that's maybe good, maybe not, the lenses that you're viewing it through, like literally put on your glasses, your lenses, are through Scripture. And if it doesn't meet up to the scriptural standards as you understand them, then they're going to kind of fall by the wayside.
Right. So some of those are pieces like taking our thoughts captive. So as far as like what do we do as believers, scriptures are clear about that, of actually taking our thoughts captive. In Proverbs 4:23, it has, guard your hearts above all else, for it determines the course of your life. I mean, that's our thoughts, our feelings get involved in this. Right. And it shows we do have control of these things.
Yeah.
And in Romans 2:12, it says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what's the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. And that's that piece where people are like, why is this happening? Well, remembering it's that testing, it's that refinement, it's that gold as it gets heated and the impurities come up to the top and gets left off. So you're actually growing.
Right.
And I use the metaphor for people that are athletes or in physical fitness. You have to get sore before you get stronger.
That's part of it,
Yeah.
No pain, no gain.
No pain, no gain, to an extent. I mean, maybe exactly. not in the generation we grew up in, but that was a little extreme. But
So that's why I'm sore today, right? Because I'm working out.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah. The other piece that God does talk about is self-discipline and that piece of giving in to our own desires. Okay. And the fact that sometimes we feel like we don't have control, but we actually can be overcomers.
Yeah.
And God says we can be overcomers, so that means that's truth.
Right.
Even if it feels overwhelming, if it feels unattainable, if He says it, we know it can happen.
Right.
So 1 John 16:33, these things have I spoken to you, so that in me you may have the peace. In the world you have tribulation, but take courage, I have overcome the world. And then 1 John 4:4, you are from God, little children, and have overcome them, because greater is He who is in you than he that is in the world. The other piece, I think, that comes with the testing and where people feel like, oh, it's not a one and done. So actually I was like, I need to find what is that verse so the thing I found that fit for me was James 4:7, submit yourselves therefore to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. So this implies that action,
right?
But it also implies that it's continual.
Right.
So do this.
Yeah.
Keep doing this.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the areas we kind of get tripped up in. So the reason our thoughts are so important is because they give us messages about ourselves that we aren't even aware of.
Yeah.
And it's often not until someone starts to speak about what's really going on internally and they say it out loud and they hear themselves say it,
Yeah.
or someone repeats it back to them, and then it's I don't really think that.
Yeah.
Well, I guess maybe I do.
Right.
So
they're living out of it and they don't even realize it.
Right. And there's that piece of when we're giving into our desires, into our thoughts, we then become controlled by them. So we really aren't free.
Right.
No matter what that happens to be, even desires. And if you're one in the desires of this world, you end up getting entrapped in that and stuck in it. And then you're wondering why you don't feel peace and why you don't feel happiness, but we're really looking for joy.
Right.
So the piece that I found pretty cool was recently I did do a training, and it's when I have stuff like this that I'm like, I love this because it just shows God. It was a neuroscience and the neuroplasticity of our brain.
Yeah.
So the new research on that.
There's a lot of good stuff.
It's really cool, and just showing how our brain actually forms new dendrites. They're branching out. So that's that thing that sends all those messages, the neurotransmitters that have to do with mental health.
Yeah.
And in this training, of course, it was secular training, but it even talked about how important it is to have that connection with others, which kind of got into the one another's that you were talking about, right?
Community is important.
Right.
Yeah.
And it did talk about the importance of sometimes even just touch. So you have to be near people to have that physical touch. And also even repeating, like when God says to be in the Word and thinking about the Word. And it talked about how just reciting, they used the 23rd Psalm. They actually did. And I was like, wow, hey.
Yeah.
They kind of pulled from a little bit of everything. So yoga and meditation. And but the 23rd Psalm made it in there.
Well, there you go.
And so it was just saying how when you're focusing on something positive, and we know we need to focus on God, that's going to give us that strength. That's going to give us that brain change.
Sure. Yeah, I know meditation is kind of a buzzword right now. And so it's, I mean, as Christians, we understand that to mean to meditate on the words of God, the true things, and to meditate, like, what is God saying to me, all that kind of stuff. But it's definitely, there's a whole bunch of new apps, and I hear about it quite a bit. As I'm thinking about some of the things that you said, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but many people, if not most people, when they come to you, they're really trying to find some peace in their life, right? And so can you dig into that a little bit more, of like the difference between what is peace, number one, and then maybe a little bit of the difference between happiness and joy?
So peace, it's usually there's a conflict of some sort, whether that's just an internal struggle, whether that's relationship issues, work, or people aren't where they thought they would be. They aren't as successful as they thought they would be, or they don't have as much money. Lots of comparisons.
Yeah.
So that
can still joy, right?
That
you start comparing.
really starts zapping joy.
Yeah. So if you can, explain to us a little bit more about what is this idea of peace, and then in relation to that, if there's a difference between joy and happiness. Right.
So peace, a lot of times people are coming in turmoil. Life isn't going well. So they just, often a word is spiraling. I just feel like I'm spiraling. And that can take many forms of what that looks like or what's happening for people.
Sure.
Or another part of peace is people not having purpose or not feeling like they have achieved what they want to achieve, or they don't have what others have. I kind of call it the Facebook phenomenon, of getting to see what people want to portray, not what's really happening with others. So you pick up the phone and, hey, how is it going? Right. And then all of a sudden you hear another story.
Yeah.
But
you
that's
hear reality.
Yeah. That's not what's going to be broadcast to everybody.
Sure.
So that's something I often recommend is take a break. Take a little hiatus from, viewing your social media, and I actually hear what an impact that makes on people.
So people could have more time too.
Absolutely. They often find that they do. And then it can lead to them feeling a little less overwhelmed, because people do feel overwhelmed. They don't have enough time. That spiraling happens from the social media in so many aspects, and it's just such a prevalent problem in our society right now. I mean, you look at teens, and we won't even go there, but it's really impactful. So
I saw even, I guess this week, Instagram has instituted a new timeout or quiet time from Instagram, so students and parents can agree on times on and off, which I think is great.
Right. Yeah.
So as I'm thinking about what you're talking about, some of this is new habits for people, right?
Yep.
And so as I think about new habits, I want to go back a little bit maybe to that earlier in our conversation where we talked neuroscience and the reconnecting of synapses and all the different highways and all that different stuff. So can you talk about how, from the research that we're getting from neuroscience, and how new habits can be created to kind of create new highways and new ways of thinking?
Right. So actually that specifically was talked about, and it was kind of like thinking of a channel, like we're rivers or like irrigation.
Yeah.
And they have these channels. Well, it takes a bit to form those new channels, even if you block something off. So it takes a while, and then it still takes a while for it to, even once that channel's open, for it to set in and keep this one blocked off, so that now your brain's going to go this direction instead of the other direction. The old way.
Yeah.
Right.
Because it's the idea of there's things in our life that we do that we don't even think of, like brushing your teeth or hopefully, and some of those kind of life habits that we've established.
Right.
But then there's some of those things in our life that are negative habits that or negative things that we talk to ourselves about that we need to, as you're talking about, create a new channel.
Right. And so sometimes people will think of the physical of, someone has a stroke and they relearn how to do something like brush their teeth or eat or talk. But people often don't think of it when it comes to mental health. But we can actually change those habits. It does take time, and it isn't easy, and we don't always see the benefits as quickly as someone might. Like, I would like to be able to brush my own teeth. Right. So the mental health, it's a little more vague for people, and it is measurable, but it doesn't feel as measurable, I think, sometimes for people.
Because it's not as instant.
Right.
In a culture that loves instant gratification or instant microwave, whatever it is.
Right.
This is a longer path. Because, I mean, when you think about, I like that, the illustration of it being basically a tributary that's changing its path. I mean, we can look back on, geologists, all those guys can look back and go, well, this path used to go this way, but over 1,000 years it changed to go this way. And so it does take a while. It does. But the impact can be seen.
And it takes that discipline, and it takes sometimes doing the opposite of what you want to do. And that was something in this training. It was saying sometimes you don't sit and think. You just do.
Just do.
So especially when it comes to things like addictions and trying to get past addictions, that work is a lot of, it kind of gets into DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, that does well with some of like emotional regulation. But that is one where sometimes you just have to do something. So it may mean physically get up, go remove yourself, but it's also sometimes making a plan. What am I going to do?
Right.
So just telling myself I'm not going to do something, well, God doesn't just say not to do something. He tells us what to do. If we do what we're supposed to, it's easier to not do.
Sure.
If we're spending our time doing what we should be doing.
Yeah, replacing old with new.
Correct.
Yeah. As I think about this, like in my own personal life, like I have morning ritual and an evening ritual. And so even with my morning ritual, I have each little piece in it. So that, like, hey, make the bed, have your morning devotional, take medicines, drink your thing, let the dog out. And it seems elementary in that, but it does keep me on task.
Right.
Because I'm easily distracted, at least for me. And so it's just something that's a ritual that's done. And then the evening, what's my evening ritual? Prepare myself for bed, but then also to look forward to the next day. And it's retrained my brain to start well and to end well. Is
Right.
what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah. And that is a discipline that we often don't have. I mean, we are a society that isn't very disciplined.
Right.
It's kind of what moves us at the moment.
Sure.
And I think that's that peace that God gives us, and that word of like steadfast, and that steadfastness that makes a big difference. And that leads into prayer is another piece that, I don't tell people just pray and everything's going to be well.
Right.
That isn't the case. I mean, God says that we are to come to him, but he knows we're going to have trouble. The Bible, when you think about fear and anxiety and the fact that in the Bible it says not to worry 365 times, one for every day, he knows.
Coincidence?
Right. Coincidence? I think not. So he knows we're going to struggle with it.
Right.
He just wants us to keep a connection with him. And so sometimes I'll even tell people, if you're at that point that you're really struggling, maybe God's just wanting your attention right now.
Yeah.
He's wanting to test you so that then you're actually going to then grow and flourish. It doesn't have to be that this is a negative thing.
Yeah.
And that this is temporary.
Yeah.
And even when we look at the perspective, and that's that immediate gratification piece, when we look at the perspective of our culture, it's get what you can now, you deserve it, instead of the opposite with scripture of it is things that take time. It is countercultural. And we often aren't going to see those results. We aren't going to see the benefits. We might not see it until eternity.
Sure.
Right? The struggle that people have, those are going to be those that get rewarded. If they're in it for God, that's that reward. And when you look at time here on earth, it's such a blip.
Right. Well, that's part of that.
Compared to eternity.
Part of that 1 Timothy 4, 7, and 8, right? Physical training is good, but spiritual training is even better because there's longer.
Right.
It's a longer view.
Yes.
And I think Pastor Eugene Peterson, who translated the Message, one of his famous phrases is, being a disciple of Jesus is walking in the same direction for a long period of time. That obedience and that. And as I've thought about that, and especially as I get older, I think about how some may, or maybe my younger self would describe that obedience sometimes as boring, because we're, as you said, we're always trying to go from here to there, fulfill and have activity and all this different stuff, because maybe a lack of peace or trying to find purpose and meaning. And so we pursue all these different things instead of just staying the course that God wants for us. And for some, especially as we're younger, I think it can feel boring and not glamorous or whatever that is.
And I think that's where that word happiness.
Yeah.
Because it makes me happy when I do that.
Yeah.
Instead of it brings me joy.
Yeah.
Because joy is more of a choice.
Sure.
I'm going to choose this. I'm going to choose joy in spite of what's happening.
Right.
I'm going to choose to think this way.
Right.
And then that's what brings about the peace.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've seen it in my own life of when I've just learned to surrender, what a difference that makes. And I think that's a word too that isn't culturally acceptable.
Yeah.
So again, so much of good mental health is countercultural.
Sure.
So we kind of have this uphill battle, and that's why we see the prevalence of mental health being so large. People might say, well, people are more aware of it. Yes, but I think that there's more to it.
Sure. Sure. There's a spiritual component. Potentially, right?
Potential. Oh, yeah.
And so, as you
Yes.
said, there's 365 verses that speak to fear and anxiety. I think thinking about it from the spiritual context is in Genesis, the reason that Adam and Eve fell was because they wanted to be like God. And so I think that's our human bent is to be God of our life and be in control of our life. And so it's that moment when we come to the end of ourself, the end of our knowledge, our wisdom, our finances, whatever it may be, that all of a sudden fear and anxiety rises up. And it's God's Spirit speaking to us saying, see, you're not God. Trust me, I've got this. And so I think that's why the multiple reasons why those verses are in there 365.
Absolutely.
65 times,
Absolutely.
so.
And I've seen in my own life where God's answered my prayer the way I wanted it answered. And then I was like, but this isn't working out as I had planned. So, but even within that, there's that tenderness that he has that I still saw benefits from it later.
Sure.
And I was like, wow, only you could have planned that.
Right.
That I was able to get all of this other stuff from that experience that I can use later.
Sure. So what are some of the tools that we have as Christians to help us with having a positive mental health?
So I think I did already talk about taking our thoughts captive and like that self-discipline and submitting to God and just really using prayer. The other piece is medications sometimes are needed.
Okay.
So there's also kind of holistic stuff. So you can do medication. Sometimes there can be things like foods that can impact people's mental health. I mean, physical can too. So it's always recommended go see your doctor, get checked out.
Right.
But certain foods can lead to things like hyperactivity. It can lead to that low motivation, just that fatigue. So certain foods people may have allergic reactions or just their body doesn't process well.
Yeah, I have some like working knowledge of like ADD, ADHD. You know, I know the terms are changing or whatever, but some of those type of things and how, like especially like artificial dyes, so like food colorings and all those kind of things impact the brain and they make it more active or less active or whatever. And so definitely, makes sense.
Yeah. And there's different trains of thought. The other piece is so foods, medications, and sometimes if people don't want medication, sometimes that's okay. And sometimes they may only need it for a time. They need it just to give them enough of a boost to be able to do the work that's hard. Sure. And then they may be able to taper off. Sure. The other piece that I can't emphasize enough is physical activity. Yeah. Because that helps with our endorphins, gives our brain these feel goods. I know I learned for myself years ago, there'd be times, and God bless my poor husband, when I would just be, getting crabby, and he'd say, go work out, and I don't want to go work out, and I do it, and then I'm just like happy as can be. So I really learned, I know myself, and I know when I'm reaching that threshold, and I just need to go work out. Yeah. So our bodies were meant to move, and we have so much cushion as far as the U.S. with a lot of our work and a lot of sitting and
as we sit here.
As we're sitting, again,
in the air conditioning.
So exercise, I'll tell people, even if it's like midday, like do something midday so that it doesn't get elevated so high. So it's just taking care of yourself. Sure. So it's kind of that spirit, mind, and body, which God talks about all of it.
It's interconnected.
Yeah. So one of the things, and this just popped in my head that's really cool that I'd heard about was, God talks about hiding stuff in our heart. And there's that connection of our mind and our heart.
Because if he's the intelligent designer, then he knows how everything works and interacts and all that stuff. We're, as humans, we're trying to actually reverse engineer what he's done.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
And so as technology has improved, like now, especially with neuroscience, we're learning so much about our brain and how things are lighting up, all this different stuff. And so we're able to see that much of what Scripture talks about actually lines up with what's actually happening in our heart and our mind and our soul physically and all of that. So it's just so cool, the day that we're living in. So so let's step back a little bit from today. What are some stories that you see in the Bible for people that are like dealing with some mental health things,
right?
And how they interact with God, or what are just some of those Bible stories?
So one of the ones I like is Jeremiah, because poor Jeremiah is like lone survivor. You know, I mean, he's like out there trying to do this all on his own and feeling so frustrated. So, I mean, and fearful in times. Because people are out to get him because you can't keep preaching this stuff. And so you think about kind of that anxiety and then that depression of I'm all alone and, you know, curse the day I was born. Yeah. You know,
I mean, he's known as the weeping prophet for a reason, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So, but then God's tenderness, he says, basically, don't worry, you will be rewarded.
Yeah.
You will be rewarded.
Yeah.
This isn't all for naught.
Yeah.
And just hearing him wrestle with, because of everyone else, I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
But this yearning and this calling, I have to.
Yeah.
I'm compelled to.
Yeah.
But then knowing, okay, God's promises that it will be worth it. I will be blessed in the end. And we all have that.
Yeah.
If we're following him.
Sure.
He does promise that.
Yeah.
In the end.
Right.
It just may not be what we see today.
Yeah. The reward may not be here. It may not be a new house or a new car or a lot of money.
Right.
But there is an eternal reward. And what is, again, the long game.
Right.
But there's a sense with Jeremiah, they had this insatiable need to do what he was called to do.
Right.
Right. And so that is something that I think in today's society, that we have a tendency to pull back from that calling on our life to talk to someone next to us and just ask, hey, how are you doing? Or smile at someone. You know, some of those little interactions that maybe God tugs on our heart to have, but for whatever reason, whatever mental things that we've got going on here, lies or whatever messages to our brain, we've talked ourselves out of it, or we have a tendency to talk ourselves out of doing some of the things that God is tugging on our heart to do. But Jeremiah said, I'm going to do it.
I'm doing it anyway.
Yeah.
I may curse the day that I was born, but I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
And then so I kind of like going from there to then Job, because it's the other one who cursed the day he was born. So with those two, I mean, completely different, because he's going through loss. I mean, and this is someone who had all the comforts and the luxuries, everything that even our society still wants.
Yeah.
He had that notoriety.
Yeah.
And then it appears he loses everything, right? He loses all the financial, all of his belongings, all of his possessions, his kids, his wife. Whew.
Everything the most precious to him.
Is, right. Yeah. And I mean, inadvertently, he loses his wife because he doesn't have all the stuff, so she doesn't want him anymore.
Right.
And so then again, he curses the day he's born. Right. But the beauty of it is God brings restoration. God brought him through it, and that he stayed faithful. Yeah. That he persevered. Yeah. And I think that's, again, why it's so hard for us in our society, is we don't have true suffering. Mm-hmm. So a word something that I'll talk about sometimes is that praying without ceasing. We don't even understand what that means. Yeah. We have no concept of that in America because we haven't faced true persecution.
Physical persecution.
Physical persecution, right. Yeah, we may get people don't like me, they're going to unfriend me, or may not want to talk to me because I'm weird, because I'm, Jesus freak or whatever.
Right. Yeah. For the most part in America, and I would say in Europe as a whole, it's been a long time since we feared for our physical life because of our
Correct.
faith. Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was that part with Job where even though he had all these physical afflictions, all of this loss, I mean, and his wife was like, just curse God and be done with this.
Yeah.
But he didn't.
Yeah. Because it's, again, we've have a tendency to think that all these peripheral things give value and value and meaning to our life, whether
Right.
it's the house, all those different things. Yeah, I think that would be most people's natural reaction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Look what you've done for God, and look what He's taken away.
Right.
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 Yeah, cool. Well, anything else you want to share with us?
I think just when people are struggling, reach out. There's a piece where we have to work on being vulnerable,
Yeah.
whether that means, but it's still using wisdom of let's look at someone who is spiritually mature and reach out to those people that you can really trust.
Yeah.
Because I've had people that, it'll even be like somebody who their marriage, there's been some issues, and it'll be they reach out to friends who then just hop on the bandwagon.
Right.
And as I've said, look for that person in your life that's not going to just jump on a bandwagon of bashing, but is going to actually pray for you and speak truth.
Right.
And then seeing the outcome when they actually do that is really cool.
Yeah.
And when you have the right people around you, and that's why it's so important to have other believers in your life that are building you up, that you can go to, that give you, well, sound advice, and give you those words of wisdom.
Yeah. Yeah. And many times it's a friend that's okay with losing you.
Right.
By telling you the truth in the moment because they love you and know that you need the truth. And that's hard.
It is hard.
On both sides.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that takes time and it takes trust and all of that. And so that means the investment can't be made at 2 a.m.
Right.
The investment has to be made, again, it's the long haul. It's
Right.
over weeks and months and years. Because when life gets difficult and you do need a 2 a.m. friend, you have to already have them.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think that's part of a struggle in our culture is we are very transitional.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard for us to be vulnerable enough to let people in. And that's why I like the idea of intimacy is that idea of into me see. And you have to be wise and discerning on who you're going to pull back the curtain of your heart, your mind, and your soul so they can truly know you and still love you.
Right.
Yeah, but that's an important piece of our mental health and spiritual health and holistic person.
Right. And it can be incremental. Like I'll tell people, you can have different friends, different levels of friends.
Sure.
And some you can share a little bit to see if this is someone trustworthy.
Right.
And then you'll know. But like you said, you want to do that early on and not just wait till there's something really big.
Yeah.
Because then you're not going to have that relationship already there.
Right. Takes time. So, hey, what a wonderful time today.
Thank you.
Talking with you and getting to hear a little bit about your story and then about learning a little bit more about mental health and being challenged by that. And I hope that you and that I hope that our listeners have been encouraged and challenged by what you've heard today as we seek to point people to Jesus. Please, this week, take the next step in your faith journey with Jesus.